It's my great pleasure to invite back to Johns Hopkins Dr. Lisa Lee, who is currently the Executive Director of the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. This is President Obama's Advisory Bioethics Commission. It's really a wonderful treat to have Dr. Lee, the Executive Director, come to speak to us about the work of the Commission and also about the particular dimensions that commissions play in sort of civic life, the public bioethics capacity of a commission, which is different than the scholarship, for example, that many of us engage in. Lisa, before coming to the commission, was with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention since 1998. Most recently serving as Chief Science Officer in the Office of Surveillance, Epidemiology, and Lab Sciences. I mentioned that Dr. Lee is being welcomed back to Hopkins. Her PhD is from the Bloomberg School, actually from what is now the Department of Population and Family Health. Had a different name, we were reminiscing. Lisa was saying she was here before the bees, before the School of Hygiene and Public Health became the Bloomberg School, and before there was a Berman Institute. I've never connected the two of them. That was very lovely. Lisa's work at the CDC has included the ethics of public health surveillance, research on HIV and fertility, HIV and AIDS survival, HIV and tuberculosis, and data quality. She has also led, in addition to her important work in these areas, several agency and cross-agency committees within the federal government working to establish and maintain an environment of scientific integrity and excellence. Some of you may know Principles and Practice in Public Health Surveillance, which is a classic, essentially text in that territory, very central to public health. You may recognize Lisa Lee's name from that. She is the lead editor, which is of this Oxford University Press book, which is now in its third edition. Dr. Lee has authored numerous scientific publications. She's, of course, served as a peer and guest reviewer for many scientific conferences and scientific journals. She also serves on the board of advisors of Georgia State University's Institute of Public Health, where she teaches ethics. I could go on and on and on, but we really are very, very fortunate to have Dr. Lee speak to us about the important work of this particular commission and about the general challenges of doing public bioethics. So please join me in welcoming you.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. I understand I have to use this microphone and be up here so we can film and have this for other audiences in the future. I'm delighted to be here today. It's great to be back. This is only my second time back in Baltimore since 1998. And last time I was back, it was just about 2 years ago when I was talking about kind of what it's like to be post-Hopkins, post-hygiene. And I was escorted up into the room where I was going to be talking, and it was the room in which I defended my dissertation, and I was really breathless. I feel much happier. So thank you so much for being here. I'm also delighted to be here among many friends and many people who have a lot of connections to the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. I will not say that phrase again for the rest of the hour because it's a mouthful. I will call us the Bioethics Commission. And you'll see that there have been lots of bioethics commissions and in a minute. But we have lots of folks here and a lot of connections with Berman and with Hopkins with this specific commission. Most of you know several of the Berman faculty have either worked in the capacity of either a senior advisor or a senior research analyst for projects that the commission have done, or have testified in front of the commission on specific projects. So, and many of you all are here. Deborah Matthews most recently led our project on privacy and progress, our whole genome sequencing and privacy project. Jeremy Sugarman was a senior advisor to us for lots of years on our moral science, our project, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Holly Taylor also presented in front of the commission last year. So we're delighted to have everyone here and happy to see you all. I want to talk a little bit today about a couple of things. One, about bioethics commissions in general, specifically about ours. And then I want to talk a little bit about doing public bioethics. As Dr. Fagan said, this is very different than doing bioethics in the academy. And I want to talk about what that means, what it means to do public bioethics, how we define it, what it looks like in this commission, and what it looks like in past commissions, and then just a little a bit about our current projects at the commission. So what are we here for? Well, the Bioethics Commission and all bioethics commissions that have been in the past in our country have been here to advise the president. The president gets advice on just about everything. The good thing is the president has asked since the 70s for advice about bioethics. And this is heartening. This is about asking for advice from learned people in the academy, in the practical world, about what to do about these tough ethical questions that have to do with science, technology, and medicine, how we make sure we do those things well, how we do those things in a moral and ethical way. And it's no different here. The U.S. has had a bioethics commission since the 70s continually. Now, all developed countries have bioethics commissions. One of these developed countries does not have a standing bioethics commission. That would be us. We have them that are stood up and taken down, usually with each new president, although sometimes it is a bioethics commission can be authorized by Congress. And so we start in the 70s here with probably the most famous bioethics commission, and this is a bigger mouthful than ours. So the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects, Biomedical and Behavioral Research, also called the National Commission. And this was authorized by Congress, a law, public law. The tenure was from 74 to 79. The most famous commission, because this commission came up with the Belmont Report. So familiar territory to all of us who've ever done research, who've ever been through an IRB, under Ford and Carter. The next commission, as you can see, also brought to be authorized through Congress. Most familiar through it by its definition of death. So we get more current here in 1994. Most of you are aware of the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. This commission brought to be through executive order for a very specific purpose. And that purpose was President Clinton wanted an investigation into this very specific set of experiments, human radiation experiments, led by no other than our Dr. Fagan. And actually it's funny because the one photograph that I love, that I always fantasize about and think about, wouldn't this be great to be the person in this photograph, is the photograph of Dr. Fagan handing the report to President Clinton. And I think, gosh, wouldn't it just be an amazing position to be in? But knowing I'll not probably ever be in that position, it was really one of the most motivating things for me when I was considering this position. And then you see these other bioethics commissions here ending with our current one here. Now, the difference between the ones with Congress and the ones authorized by executive order, Congress can put into law that a commission must exist. And that can be put into law for as long as Congress wants it to exist. It can ask for specific outcomes for specific products. An executive order can do the same, but in the most current existence here, our executive order it asks us, requires this commission to be a federal advisory committee. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means and what this is, what specifically that requires of us, and what it means that we have to do. So that previous slide, I just want to give credit here to Jason Schwartz, who was also a staffer at our commission, who does a lot of work. His scholarly work is on history of bioethics commission, and he did much work on putting this together. So I just want to give Jason a shout out there. So our commission, we were created in 2009 by this executive order, where the president made it clear that as we invest as a nation into in science and innovation, we have to pursue these things, these advances, in a way that is responsible. And by that he meant in a way that is in conjunction with and congruent with our moral and ethical approach to things. And he wanted us, as a country, to embody a panel, an expert panel, that draws from the fields of bioethics, science, medicine, theology, humanities, social sciences, from a variety of places, just exactly what bioethics looks like. And this panel would be a federal advisory committee. And this committee would be an august group of folks. And it turns out, in fact, that's exactly what he got. This group, the Bioethics Commission, is chaired by the University of Pennsylvania's president, Dr. Amy Gutman, who herself is a renowned political philosopher. Dr. James Wagner, the president of Emory University, who's an engineer. And you can see then 11 others from a variety of disciplines, engineering, theology, medicine, science, a patient advocate, all different folks from all different walks of life to mirror exactly what bioethics is all about. This group, they all have their regular full-time jobs. They're all very well-established scholars in their own rights, and they volunteer their time to develop to be this commission. And as I mentioned, this is a federal advisory committee. So what exactly does that mean? Well, this committee is subject to the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Anyone know what that is or what that means? Yes, I wonder if it does. Well, this means basically that it is an independent committee that acts really as an advisor to the president. We don't make policy, we don't make laws, we don't tell anybody what to do. Sometimes we really want to, but we don't. We advise and we recommend. In particular, we recommend about it being a bioethics commission, we recommend about issues affecting all of us. And we have, because of the charge the president gave us in his executive order, we are not a single issue commission. Some of the commissions, as you saw, the radiation experiments and some of the others, were very much a single issue. You look at one thing, you do an investigation, you do a study on a single thing. We are a broad committee. We look at whatever the president is interested in our looking at. The president or his cabinet can charge us with whatever they want us to look at. And we have had a wide variety of topics, which I'll talk about in a second. The idea is that this wide variety of topics affects all of us. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who recently charged us with our report that will be coming out on March 19th, it is true that while few people really know very much about the fact that the Bioethics Commission exists and that these 13 people, these scholars and such, pull together ideas and thoughts and recommendations for the president, the work that they do is critically important and has an effect on the lives of all Americans, and possibly broader than that, but certainly affects all Americans. So one of the things that the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or the FACA, requires us to do is to be extremely transparent. As advisors to the president, he can take or leave our recommendations. He's not obligated to enact anything we recommend. But because we're interested in his taking our work seriously, we carefully deliberate, we transparently deliberate, we take in all the best information we can, and because we're dealing with bioethics, we're dealing both with factual information, medicine, science, technology, so we do have to bring in experts and get the science right. Before then, we can apply the ethical dimensions and the ethical decision-making, the frameworks to come up with the recommendations. We do all of this entirely in public. there's no behind closed doors, there's no deal making, there's no, I know it doesn't sound quite like Washington, but really, it's very open. All of our meetings are open to the public. All of our meetings are webcast live. And we bring in the widest variety of people we can. This is what public bioethics is about. This is taking us out of the academy, critical work, and we rely, as I mentioned earlier, on people who do this kind of scholarly work, both people on our commission as well as people on our staff, as well as people like you all who do this work to come and talk with us. But we do this kind of bioethics in public, transparently, because these are issues that affect all 300 million of us. So I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by public bioethics. So what does it mean to you when I say those words? I put a little spectrum up here. You know, we talk about clinical ethics, and here's your grandmother not well, and what should we do in her end of life. And then we all know that there is a big difference between that and public health ethics. You, better than anyone, and probably on earth in this institution, know the difference between public health ethics and clinical ethics. And then there's public ethics. What is that? What does that mean to you? Nothing? Yes?
Funds for?
Pardon me?
What we use public funds
What
for?
we use public funds for, right? Yeah, how do we distribute? There's some justice component. What else? Yeah? Societal implications? Yeah, certainly.
As, on top of those two things, kind of trying to gauge what the public itself has to say about things like this.
Public
Not just,
perspective?
I mean, the opinion of ethics or ethical topics outside of the academy.
Okay. What do people think about what we're doing? What's going on? What are these issues? Yeah.
Having to work extra hard to frame things clearly because the public can so easily misunderstand what you're doing.
This is worth repeating several times. Having to frame things really clearly because the public can easily misunderstand what we're doing. Good. Anything else? All right. It means all those things and a lot more. Public ethics is really a special thing. It's easy for me to say that because I get to do it every day. But public health ethics has to do something with to whom the duty is owed, right? So if we look up here, like the spectrum of bioethics, we think about clinical ethics in the sense of the duty is owed to the patient. So we talk about the fiduciary duty between the clinician and the patient. So that's a little bit different than public health ethics, where we talk about the duty owed to the community or the population, and that can be one way we parse out the differences between clinical and public health ethics. So some people think of it in terms of that. Also, the topics sometimes can be different, right? So clinical ethics, we talk about this person's end of life. Public health ethics, we might talk about managing an infectious disease in a community. Public ethics, we might talk about how to spend money. We might talk about how to make decisions about those kinds of things. Process also matters, right? Who do we involve in decision making? Who gets to decide, firstly? And then who gets to have input into the decision? So public health ethics really is partly a different process than clinical ethics, and public ethics is even a bigger process than that. And the process to get to all the things that we say public ethics is, and the process that we use, and the process that really defines public ethics, is public deliberation. And this isn't just talking about things out loud, or being transparent, or webcasting. It's really a specific process, and that process is called democratic deliberation. This is a specific way of doing business. Again, not just being transparent, but being transparent, being inclusive, being able to ensure that all voices are heard. So when we leave the table with a decision, even those who the decision is not in their favor, they feel heard, and they feel like they can support the decision because they have been heard, convinced that the approach that the decision has come to is one that has valued their input. Democratic deliberation has not always been called that, though it has been used for decades. It was highly used. It was the process basically that was described in the Belmont report. It was described in all of the reports, the research involving children report that the National Commission used. They didn't call it democratic deliberation. They just described what they did. And if you look at the features of democratic deliberation and you look at the description that they wrote about their methods, it's exactly that. So it was labeled later, but it's a foundational principle of public ethics. And it's the principle that this commission articulated as their primary method of doing public ethics. Its purpose here is really to engage the citizenry in a meaningful way. Not just to engage people, not to lead people to believe that they can come and talk and say their thing even though the decision's already been made. It's not that. It's really engaging in a meaningful way. It's about informing and listening. It's about finding common ground where there is common ground. There isn't always a lot of it, but there is some usually. And it's about engendering respect and reciprocity. So by respect, clearly we want to know people's feelings and views on things, but we also want people to know that we expect something back from them, from being involved in the process. That reciprocity really is important. There are certain kinds of topics that are better suited for democratic deliberation. They happen to be the kind of topics that a bioethics commission might get, things that rise to the level of a presidential commission. And I will say that the kinds of topics we get, or a presidential commission would get, are not the things that you get and you go, oh yeah, that's pretty straightforward, that would be a yes or a no, right? Like we don't get those kinds of topics. We get the kind where everyone has already pulled their hair out and then say, yeah, can you guys do this? Usually contentious and controversial topics are great for democratic deliberation. Things that need both technical and scientific expertise, which I mentioned earlier, is that, plus some practical way, something we need to do something about. It's not just, let's think about this. That's really important, and it's really important for us to have the academy to do a lot of that. But a public deliberation, a democratic deliberation, and a bioethics commission is really about practical application. It's really about doing something about the problems, the issues, the concerns that we have. So the practical application is a key piece of this. It's also really good for things that people don't really trust the government about. So it's good for investigations, for things that people think the government did something bad, and they want a public hearing. It's good for that. It's also superb when we're dealing with the public good. We talked about, like, what is the public value? It's great there. It's about shifting from the individual to the collective. And democratic deliberation really is about moving from one's own moral compass, what would I do in that situation, to something more toward an ethical decision-making process. And this is where the idea that if I come to the table with my own moral compass, and I'm certain that my way is the right way, and I'm here to convince you of that, and 5 other people are at the table with 5 different ways, and they're equally as certain, and we do effective democratic deliberation, even if the group ends up not going my way, I've been able to make the switch from agreeing that my moral compass is the only way to agreeing that if we make an ethical decision, it doesn't have to be my way as long as we use a framework that I agree is an ethical framework and we can make a decision. That even if it's not with my moral compass, it's with a framework that, to me, I can agree is ethical. We all leave the table perhaps not happy, but comfortable. And that's what democratic deliberation is about, and that's what this group does. So at its foundation, the Bioethics Commission uses this. At its foundation, all other commissions have used it too. They just didn't call it that necessarily. And this really is the heart of doing public ethics, doing public bioethics. again, we express this democratic deliberation through transparency, accessibility, through participation. Open meetings, as I said, everything is webcast, everything is, we vary our geographic locations. We try not to be inside the Beltway centric. We have held meetings in Miami, in Boston, in San Francisco. We move around the country in order to make sure that participation is geographically diverse. With every topic, with every, where we try to get information, we do requests for information, we have public comment, we have an email information box, and people take advantage of that. We get lots and lots of comments from a very diverse set of folks. And we make, almost with every report, we make recommendations for community engagement, which is one type of democratic deliberation. So while we practice democratic deliberation in our own deliberations to make recommendations to the president, we also recommend for many of these, resolving many of these issues, that community engagement as a type of democratic deliberation occur for some of the issues that have been put before us. So I want to talk a little bit specifically about how this commission uses democratic deliberation and why. And the biggest reason for us is because we get this broad charge of any topic that pleases the president at the time, bring us up on the red bioethics emergency phone and ask us to do something about it. And this is a list of the kinds of topics we've had so far. So our first topic was synthetic biology. They wanted us to talk about what are the ethical issues around synthetic biology, what should we do? How quickly should we move forward? Should we put the brakes on? Should we go fast? What should we do? How to deal with this emerging technology. The second topic, when the Susan Reverby discovered the papers of Dr. John Cutler in the University of Pittsburgh and found that there were all kinds of looking like they were unethical experiments in Guatemala, inoculating people with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid without their consent. The president wanted an investigation to see what actually happened. Turned out, in fact, they were pretty awful, pretty unethical, even for contemporaneous times. And he asked us to do two things. One, to look at what happened, report out on that, and then to investigate whether current rules and regulations around research protections for human participants were adequate. So we ended up doing two projects for that. Pretty different from synthetic biology. Then, right on the heels of that, the commission itself, again, very august group of bioethicists themselves, was very interested in this new technology of whole genome sequencing and what it meant for people's privacy. The new technology, again, similar to synthetic biology, but not the same issues scientifically. Ethically, some things overlapped, so we took that on. Currently, we're working on a charge we got from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, who asked us to enumerate the ethical issues of doing medical countermeasure research with children, specifically to look at the ethical issues associated with doing a pre-event trial of anthrax vaccine with children. So, you know, not an easy one. That report will come out on March 19th. And then our next topic in the hopper right now, incidental findings in clinical research and direct-to-consumer contexts. Lots of ethical issues, as I'm sure you can imagine in that one. So a wide variety, we have to be ready for anything. And we are. And we need the public in order to inform us on what these things are. We need scientists, we need physicians, we need people who are invested in that piece of it, and we need ethicists and others who can help us with that part. So, the other part of being public about what we do is informing clearly the public about bioethics issues. This is something that this commission feels very strongly about. What can we do? What is our role in ensuring that the good work that this commission does, supported by 15 to 20 staff members, trained scientists, trained legal experts, trained bioethicists, all this work that these topics represent year-long investigations, etc. How can we make sure that the public gets the most from this? We are funded by public funds, and the president has asked us to do this important work. And it matters to us that our materials get into the hands of students and faculty and the general public who happens to be interested in topics related to bioethics. So a great part of our work is ensuring that we create materials that will put this work in the hands of folks interested. So we've done a couple of things. Now that we have 5 reports ready to go and out there, we're creating a whole host of pedagogical materials to influence, to teach the next generation of bioethicists. So all of you who teach in traditional and non-traditional settings, all of you who are learning about bioethics, you get a whole slew of new cases. You can ditch those 20-year-old ones and add some new ones to your plate. We have 2 things right now that are, one's ready and another is just about ready. One is a study guide to the Ethically Impossible report that we put out. The Ethically Impossible report is the report on the Guatemala STD investigation. And it's a study guide that brings that particular report, which was meant to give the president the results of the investigation, brings that to life in the classroom. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other piece is that we have our project lead here, Misty Anderson, who is working on an integrated topical materials across all of our reports. So we will have, for example, topics such as informed consent, and how does all of the work of the commission across all these reports look at informed consent, for example, and other issues. That's just one example. So both integrated and report specific. So we're about to launch that probably in the next few months around the integrated stuff, but the study guide already exists. So I want to talk a little bit about what our products are, because we can do great work, but if it doesn't get out there, if it doesn't inform the public, then we haven't really done that much about the public bioethics. We've gotten what they give us, but we feel very strongly about giving that back. This is the work we've done so far. This is the synthetic biology. Here's the Guatemala experiments. We did the research participants and their protections. This was an international panel that also commented on international protections, privacy in progress, and then our next one, which will come out on the 19th, will be the medical countermeasures research with children. These are what our reports look like. They're all available at bioethics.gov. Each has both the science component as well as the ethics component. And they're similarly structured, so once you see one, they kind of look familiar inside. Each has this rollout piece that puts it out into the public's hands. So it's both a component that goes to the president with our recommendations, and then into the popular literature, so to speak. So those who can use it in their scientific community and or their ethics community can use it as well. We have a communications group that works on getting these out there. So as you can see, lots of coverage and lots of use. This was one of our communications folks' favorite front matter of the whole genome sequencing with the cupcake, or the muffin and the coffee cup. So never leave your coffee cup behind. Someone will take your saliva and sequence your genome, and then you can read all about what the problems are with that in our report. And then I want to talk a little bit here about kind of what we're going to, what our plans are, again, to make sure that we get these educational materials out. So in both our first report, which was our new directions, the one about synthetic biology, we specifically recommended that in this era of multidisciplinary science, where it's rare that a single discipline, except maybe in the laboratory, but even then not so much anymore, but a single discipline is doing all of the science around a topic. But certainly things like synthetic biology, genome sequencing, we have all kinds of folks coming to the table. And we really need to be thinking when we do clinical research and other things that people from engineering to material science to medicine, to bench science, all coming together to do research that affects human beings. And all of those people need training in the implications of this science, that is, in bioethics. And so in this report, in December of 2010, the Commission recommended that ethics education be improved, that we have actual cases and consultation with other agencies like National Academy of Sciences and Engineers, where we help folks outside the medical setting, outside the traditional biomedical situation, to improve ethics education. We did the same thing in our research, our human research protections report, where we said, we really need to do a better job in this country teaching scientists. We have to expand the ethics discourse, and we have to improve education. So we're clearly wanting to make an effort here. So we started with Ethically Impossible. It just was the most accessible and the easiest. So we've got these 4 products that have come from this charge of the President. We have the study guide, which I talked a little bit about already. We have thousands of primary source documents from this investigation, where the Commission actually dug through historical documents, letters, newspaper articles, grant proposals, protocols, and linked documents to investigate, to create this written history of what happened in Guatemala. In this report, which is just over 100 pages, we barely were able to scratch the surface of what we found in this thing. But we have a repository of all of these primary source documents on the web, open to anyone who wants to do primary research on this. So think about who students you might have, your own interest in this kind of research. This is open, hyperlinked inside this report, and we really want these documents to be used. If you can think of, it'd be a great master's thesis, it'd be an awesome project. There's lots of papers to be written out of these documents. So please fish around on the website, look at these source documents. Same thing for the subject data spreadsheet. There were thousands of subjects, and some of them used in more than one experiment at more than one time. And the Commission poured through laboratory books handwritten by Dr. Cutler. And no offense to the physicians in here, but we all know what handwriting looked like, right? And in these laboratory books, faded over time, poring over those and connecting laboratory tests, laboratory results, dates, times, inoculations, treatment or no treatment, to each subject. This is an incredible resource, untapped, basically. Please go look around. Fantastic place for students looking for topics. And finally, as part of the other report that came out of this charge, the Human Research Protections, on the 15th of this month, we're releasing the Landscape Human Subjects database. Jeremy involved in that, and the release that's happening on the 15th. There will be an article in IRB announcing the release. But this database contains for the first time ever, all of the U.S. government projects from 2006 to 2010 that involve human subjects. Some information about that, which I'll share in a minute. First time ever they've been collected in one place. So this is the report, Ethically Impossible, and this is the study guide. The study guide basically has several pedagogical goals here. One, to talk about multidisciplinary research, to talk about history and bioethics. We all know we can learn from egregious errors in the past and should. Talks about this case study approach in bioethics, responsible conduct of research, resource. Clearly, this is something that's important and illustrated quite sadly, but quite well in this examination. And public health ethics. Clearly, this was done by the Public Health Service. Talked about the importance of STDs and prevention and the war effort, etc. The content of this study guide, a little different than a report. The audience is clearly different, but it comes in topic modules instead of a temporal report of what happened. So vulnerable populations talks about secrecy, There's another one on informed consent, scientific integrity, so it's lumped in topics instead of time. Again, some primary source documents are highlighted here, so you get a taste of what's in that primary source document database. There's some comment analysis there, so emphasis commenting on that, and then some discussion prompts, so all kind of set out for you if you teach, really easy, and it's also modular, so you can do a module if you're doing a lunchtime type thing. You can do one topic instead of all of it, or you could teach a whole course on it. And then recommended readings for further study. The primary source documents, we have over 125,000 pages of documents. 550 of them have been published, but we have lots of them that are unpublished documents. Really a gold mine. Someone studying the history of medicine, someone studying literature. I mean, these are documents that you could do an amazing amount of work on. Many of them are original, all of them hyperlinked. Could do really fascinating work with this. The spreadsheet, again here, 10,000 pages of documents from Dr. Cutler. Not only are they all hyperlinked and you can see them in PDFs on the website, they're also all stored at the National Archives in Morrow, Georgia, if you actually wanted to go touch them and look at them. But you needn't do that. You could just look at them from the desktop. And finally, the landscape database. This human subjects research supported by the U.S. government by study title, number of locations and sites, number of participants, etc. Again, we did a little bit of work on this to describe what the U.S. government was doing. This is more than what's in clinicaltrials.gov, because most of the research that we fund in the U.S. is not clinical trials research, it's observational research, other things, and they're all in here. We would love for somebody to dive in here and take a look, tell us what we're doing. So please, lots of opportunity for primary analysis here. All right, I'm going to end here with just some current projects, let you know what we're doing. We've got the medical countermeasure research with children. This is, any of you who've ever done research with children or thought about it or even read any of the regulations associated with doing that already know, wow, that would be tough, and it was. Our report release is the 19th. And then our next project, queued up, is incidental findings, as I mentioned. The ethical context of incidental findings is a little different in each of these settings, where the ethical duty is different in a clinical setting than it is in a research setting, than it is in a direct-to-consumer setting. So we're going to explore that. How one gets incidental findings varies depending on the modality. Your whole genome sequence might find something else. Neuroimaging, you might find something else, just a simple X-ray. So there are lots of different ways in which one might find incidental findings. The thing we're interested in is the ethical obligation one has to deliver them, to not deliver them, etc. in these various settings. So we begin that on April 30th when we have our next meeting. The medical countermeasures charge from the secretary was very specific, asking us to do a thorough review of the considerations, the ethical considerations of the clinical trials for medical countermeasures among children, including specific considerations of pre and post anthrax vaccine trials, post-exposure prophylaxis in children. So the idea here is that if we don't have an anthrax event, we don't have data in how the vaccine works in children, should we expose children to the risk of a vaccine trial when we don't know what the threat of an event is, and we don't know, whether kids will ever need to use the information that we get from such a trial? Or should we wait until an event occurs and then do observational trials? So that's kind of what we're dealing with, and you can see the results on the 19th. Our future public meetings, we have 3 left this year. We had one in January in Miami. We're back in DC in April, Philly in August, and back in DC in December. Anyone is welcome at these meetings, so if anyone's interested in a short train ride up, we'd be happy to see you at the meeting. And as I mentioned, they're always live webcast at bioethics.gov. And anytime you have a question or a comment, always welcome at info@bioethics.gov. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to it.
That was terrific, Lisa. The floor is open, and
Yes, please, go ahead.
The predecessor commission under President Bush was accused, rightly or wrongly, of departing from the kind of platonic ideal of the Bioethics Commission described. Aside from transparency, knowing that history, how has the current commission dealt with those kinds of charges and avoiding them in the future?
So the question was, the prior commission has been accused, rightly or wrongly, of not meeting the kind of ideal of a public bioethics commission. And so I'm going to go back to this slide because I think one of the things that I appreciated about the slide that Jason Schwartz made was the information he gave here was the idea that every commission had a little bit of a different flavor, right? So the commission that, the one right before ours, that President, I'm going to do this, President Bush had here, the council, we call them the council, we call ourselves the Bioethics Commission. We're in their office space, by the way, so it's a little weird juju in there, but anyway, they, you know, they're known for, or they have the reputation, as you mentioned, as this kind of contentious and theoretical, not very practical. The executive order that they, you know, and what President Bush wanted is different than what President Obama wanted. President Obama really wants us and asks us to provide him with practical recommendations. He really wants us to solve problems with practical recommendations. And our chair, Amy Gutman, is committed to doing this public deliberation, this democratic deliberation, to come to a place where we can actually deliver things, recommendations that can be used. I mean, we really, the commission is very committed to this idea that what we want to do is resolve issues and resolve problems in ways that will enable us to function, not so much, you know, to wax philosophical about things. I mean, that's useful, and there are places where that's done, and we actually make very good use, I think, of people who do that for a living by bringing them to testify in front of the commission. It's really important for us to have theoretical philosophers and ethicists come and talk with us about those things. But in the end, what the president wants is us to provide recommendations that he can use, that he can implement. And you know, we are required as a federal advisory committee to report what happened to our recommendations. And so we make them, and then we have to report every year which ones were implemented or not, and by whom. So we take that accountability seriously. We're just a different flavor. And I think it's a matter of, you know, what we're committed to, and that is being useful. Yes?
I just want to follow up on that question. I think it's safe to say that there's been an upward trajectory of politicization of these issues and things that are dealt with in bioethics. How does the common ground approach that you have in the next slide or two really work within the sort of polarizing environment?
That's a great question. So the increased politicization of bioethical issues, and how do we get to common ground on things that tend to be, you know, pretty wide. You know, one of the things, again, being a very practical commission, we really do try to get to the place where we can get, you know, recommendations that the president can use to do something. And for us, the two things that are really important is to get the science down. We do that first, always. We have, you know, scientific experts come to us and give us the information we need, and give the commission the information they need, and then we look at the ethical framework and outline how we would recommend to go forward based on those two things. And it's not that ultimately we get to a place where the commission says this is the right thing to do or this is the wrong thing to do. The commission gets to a place that we recommend these things happen to go forward, and we recommend that this change occur, that change occur. It's not that we come up with the answer. We come up mostly with a way forward. And, you know, I think in ethics, really, as we all know, it's, you know, most of the time we generate more questions than we do answers in the first place. But, and most of the charges we've received have been really to enumerate what the issues are, which, you know, is a lot easier than saying, what should we do here? In this current project, we got a little bit of both of that. You know, what are the ethical issues associated with doing medical counter research with children? And, you know, what should we do here? And those are a little, the what should we do here is a little tougher, but again, the idea is to really carefully consider what needs to be done. And with this particular project, we actually delayed release because we weren't done deliberating in our original framework. We needed more time. And the deliberation wasn't so much among the commission, I mean it was, but it was to bring more people to the table. We needed some more people from different perspectives. So it's really getting to that place. Yes?
You said that you would take recommendations of things to study. The United States does a lot of torture, and I don't like that. I don't approve of it. And I know that there are people in the government who very strongly do approve of it. And also, apparently, the American Psychological Society had a tremendous internal argument about whether psychologists should be helped with that kind of torture. And I was wondering if you'd like to have that as a suggestion, I'll send it to you.
Duly noted. For those of you, the comment was that he was suggesting we take on as a topic, or add to our list, about whether the U.S. should be involved in doing torture and whether certain people, in, you know, in this case psychologists, but perhaps medicine and other folks should, you know, caring profession should be involved in that. So, thanks. Yes.
First, I want to echo the description you just gave, that you mostly identify what the issues are more than actually saying what should be done. I think it's a very important distinction. And I would add that to your slides because that's, I think, clarifies a lot. The second question, just for my clarity, so you talk about everything being done in the open, but surely you have to get together and say, well, now how are we going to go forward in this? And you don't say that in an open meeting. You have to say, well, now we've heard this, we've heard that, we've heard this other thing. What seems to be a way to go forward that will have some benefits and offer some practical lessons? So that can't be open.
That is open. So to repeat the question, so two things. One, the distinction between we enumerate what the issues are rather than say what to do. We do both. I don't want to shortchange the fact that we actually do make recommendations about how to move forward. But as I said, in bioethics in general, there's rarely right answer colon. You know, I mean, that just it just doesn't happen. So mostly it's about paving a way forward. So it is both. We do make concrete recommendations for the president to consider assigning to a division or an agency to move forward. And some of them are much more concrete than others, depending on what the topic is. It just depends. And it also depends on what we're asked to do. Some, you know, in the Guatemala investigation, it was investigate and tell me what happened. So there weren't recommendations. I mean, there wasn't. He didn't ask us to do anything except that, which we did thoroughly, and you know, gave him a great report about what happened. There wasn't anything. There weren't any recommendations to do anything next. A lot of things happened as a result of the investigation of what came to light, but that wasn't what we were asked to do. We were one part of a bigger scheme. So I want to clarify that. In terms of, what was your other comment?
Some must have deliberations.
The deliberations. Actually, I mean, the point about, you know, so we deliberate, people come to speak with us, and then your comment was, you know, there certainly has to be some point at which we kind of get together and say, now we've heard all this, what do we do? Much of that, in fact, all of that occurs at the meetings. I mean, if you watch some of the tapes, or some of the webcasting tapes, listen to me, gosh, how old am I? If you watch some of the 8-tracks, no, if you watch the webcasting, you'll see that usually what happens is people come, the process is people come, they sit on a panel, and then, you know, at the end of the session, there is a time which we call the round table, and there is a discussion, and the commission discusses. So we heard from this person about this, and the person sitting there, and then we say, so what do you think about that, and how should we move forward? And then the commission said, you know, a commission member will say, yeah, I don't think that that's the way we should go. And then someone else will say, well, I really think that we need to do this or that. And the deliberation happens out loud.
And then you take down the notes and.
Oh, yeah.
And then you.
And that's why we have 15 or 20 of us. Madly.
So you might
Yeah.
mention the fact rules about victim screen.
Yeah, okay, well, that's a great point. So
You're actually.
there are,
limitations
because it's a
on it.
federal advisory committee, I mean, there's, you know, I put the laws, numbers up there, 5 USC Appendix 2. There are very specific rules about what we can and cannot do. And we are, by law, required to deliberate in public. We are not allowed to do the back, you know, behind the doors meetings. The only way in which we can, the one thing we can do that is not public is administrative stuff. Like, where do we want to have our next meeting? What can we order for lunch? You know, what, you owe me $14 for lunch last week or something. Like, only administrative things. We cannot do substantive discussions behind closed doors. That all has to be deliberated in public. There is a mechanism for subcommittees that don't have to be deliberated publicly. We've used that maybe twice for 2 topics, but all of the subcommittee deliberation has to be reported back to the entire committee in public. So even that is not entirely below the radar. So it is I mean, and these are, you know, GAO, Government Accountability Office, is charged with ensuring that these FACA rules are met, and, you know, there's a designated federal official, and it's all very.
Can I just push a little bit more?
Sure,
I
please
really
do.
want to understand. They sound so hard to do. So then
It
you
is.
put together a draft report.
Yes,
You don't release that to the public, but you send that around to your members.
correct.
Who then can send replies to you.
Yes.
And then you redraft and everybody, so that part's not public, right? So there's an opportunity for doing those kinds of discussions that you can't do in public.
Right, so the drafting occurs, and there are drafts that are not in public, but the drafting is about getting
I understand.
written what was done in public, right? So the idea would be to look at the report, look at the discussions and the deliberations. If they did not match, if the final report does not match what the deliberations were, then clearly some FACA rule was not followed. But yeah, that's correct. Yes.
I have a question about how things get on the agenda. I'm fascinated by the study of this question about anthrax vaccine in children. It's such a weird question, and it's sort of so far out of time. And so the question is like, who gets to push? Somebody pushed to get that one on the agenda. So I mean, it just doesn't. That one just doesn't pop up as some of the other things that are some of the other things were completely obvious, right? But like this one just sort of like, how did that one land in your lap? 'Cause
It's a great question. How did the anthrax question land in our lap? Great question. So how we get our assignments are through the president or any of his cabinet can ask us to take on a question. Or the commission can come up with their own. I mean, they're all, have their fingers on the pulse of the bioethics, and they came up, for example, with the privacy and the whole genome sequencing on their own. So we've got a list of things we want to do someday when we're not doing assignments. But the anthrax one came up because the National Biodefense Science Board, a different FACA, recommended, there was an exercise, Homeland Security did a exercise called Dark Zephyr. They took on made a anthrax attack on a city kind of like San Francisco. And they discovered that, 8 million people would be exposed to anthrax, nearly a quarter of them would be children, and there were no data on what to do with children who've been exposed. So they said, government, you should do, we're FACA, we're independent people, we're advising the president, you should do trials on kids. Scientifically, there are no data, you need data. But don't do the trials until you get an ethical review. Is it scientifically you should do it? It's a three-legged stool. Science, security, you should do it, but get the ethical leg of the stool done first. And then the secretary said, oh, I've just, the people who can do that for you, called us up, said, can you guys do this? And here we are.
It's interesting. It's just sort of suspiciously, I think, well, somebody must be trying to sell an anthrax vaccine, and that's why it came up.
Actually, the anthrax vaccine, no, the anthrax vaccine exists. No, the anthrax vaccine, no, it exists, that millions of doses, yeah, millions of doses have been given, and, yeah, it's not.
But you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
It's
do,
sort of, it's
yeah.
a question that sort of came
Sure.
out of.
Although, so
I
my,
think this will be the, is this the last question? Okay, go ahead.
yeah,
No, it's just a follow-up
one
about,
last
at what, do you have freedom to broaden the question so it's more generalizable? So I could imagine
Right.
that
That's
you could
right.
deliberate on this question without being specific to anthrax, but countermeasures, how do we deal with countermeasures in children?
Yeah, and that's actually what her
Yeah.
question was, twofold, and that's why I showed you the charts, twofold. What do we do, what are the ethical considerations for doing medical countermeasure research with children? Firstly, broadly. Specifically then, what should we do about anthrax? And we did both of those in this report.
one last question.
Okay,
Elaine.
yes, please.
Would you clarify again, would a council appointed by the prior president sunset when he goes out and the new president
Yes.
appoints?
So how it works, and the question was, would the council or commission sunset with the new president? So by executive order, the FACA, the law, says that any federal advisory committee can last for 2 years at a time. So this executive order that brought us into being in 2009 expired 2 years later. The night before we were about to be out of existence, we got another executive order and we're extended for 2 more years. Probably the night before we're out of existence this September, we'll get another one and be extended for 2 more years. But when this president is out of office, we will also sunset.
Do you have a lot of staff people who've gone on year after year?
We do.
different-
Yeah, we have anywhere between 15 and 20 staff, and we have senior research analysts, we have mid-level research analysts, we have lots of interns and other folks who, between 15 and 20, depending upon our intern pool, et cetera.
We could go on, but we can't. Lisa, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.